I was at the BBC, and I'd always been contracted at the BBC, and then became a staff member for about a year, and they put me on all those. The BBC used to do those Screen 1s and Screen 2s, which were like mini feature films. So I'd done work with Antonia Bird, I'd done Priest, and I'd done a film called Safe, which had won a BAFTA for best whatever it was. I'd done something with Peter, a one-off Screen 1 called Loved Up, and we did that with Ian Hart and Lena Headey. And then I left the BBC, and I got a call out of the blue from this Italian who said, my name's Roberto Pasolini, and I want you to read a script. My director wants to work with you. And I thought, okay. He didn't say which director. He just said, my director. So he sent me this script. And I barely laughed when I was reading it. So I rang up, I said, I really like it, you know. He said, well, can you come and meet me? So that was it. And then I discovered it was Peter. So that was my first film. Well, I have to say, I was actually shitting myself about it's a feature film, you know. And then I thought, no, I'm going to treat it like one of those Screen 1s, Screen 2s. So, you know, there was no difference really at all. It was just like doing that. So the process is the same, whatever you do really. So, you know, we were up in Sheffield, and Roberto got Leslie, who was our production manager, to sort of say, you know, Roberto wants you to prep it in Sheffield. And I'm saying, what? I don't want to prep this in Sheffield. You know, I want to be in London prepping this. So, you know, I was up and down, up and down. No, the process is the same, whatever, really. You know, once you get over that initial, oh my God, it's a feature film. The major thing, I think, was trying to get each character so they were recognizable as that character. So each character had a little individuality to them. That was what we wanted to do. Funnily enough, when I knew I was coming to do this, I always used to keep like photo albums. I don't do it anymore, but I used to keep photo albums of films. And I was looking at the full Monty photo album that we had. And I remember the boys were all so bored in Sheffield when we were prepping and they were rehearsing on and off, that I got them all to come in, and because Roberta wanted to see their costumes kind of together. And I said, well, you know, it's not really going to look good on a rail. So I got them all to come in and be photographed. And what we did, we were lying costumes on the floor and standing on a chair photographing them. And Hugo and Steve and Mark came in, and they were a bit bored that day. So I got them to put the costumes on and lie on the floor. And we photographed from I was looking at all these pictures, and Hugo's doing strange poses and everything on the floor. So yeah, that was one of the biggest challenges for it. You know, trying to get each character so he had something individual. Steve, you know, Lomper had, you know, we gave him horrible sweaters, you know, cheap sweaters from Sheffield Market, and that was kind of his thing. You know, he wore some crappy sweaters. Hugo was the cute one, so had to look, you know, pretty cute. Bobby had a leather jacket. That was his thing, beaten up old leather jacket. Tom, you know, was kind of an office, you know, a guy who, you know, wanted a career, had a career to all intents and purposes, so presented a front. But we tried to bring a kind of northern taste into him with these shirts and ties. He wore horrible ties. I mean, they were horrible. And sweaters and a horrible kind of anorak coat. But, you know, he was presenting a front. So, and Mark, you know, had the Sheffield rugby shirt. The red leather thongs, yeah. Yeah, we had those made in Clone Zone on Old Compton Street. And I remember going into Clone Zone, never been in a shop like that in my life, and said, I need you to make me, can you make me? Or do you have anything hanging on a rail? And he said, oh, well, we can make you something. And I said, well, let's go for leather. And so they made the red leather thongs, which we had to line for Bobby because they rubbed. They were a bit uncomfortable, but they weren't very savoury by the end. Because we had no money, you know, we had one for each guy. So, you know, when you've had that on several days running, it wasn't that pleasant. I remember we used to keep them in carrier bags. Each one was plopped into a carrier bag and put on the next day, yeah. Yeah, I think they were horrified. Yeah, I mean, they were. I seem to remember. Well, I fitted Bobby and Hugo was done, a couple were done at Carlo Manzi's in London. Bobby was fitted up in Sheffield. And Tom I bought everything for, and Lomper, Steve, I bought everything for, and Paul Barber, his stuff came, because he was little retro, vintage stuff, and that all came from Carlo Manzi, so he was fitted in London. But yeah, the red leather thong business, well, they were just handed out. I think they took so long in coming. I seem to remember they were late arriving. They're not in time for anybody's fittings, so they came as sort of a bulk load, and I just handed them out at rehearsal saying, here you are, go and try those on. I remember when we did the scene, because we had one of everything. I mean, there was no repeats. We had seriously no money. And I remember it was a full, it was real strip women who went to strip clubs and went to see strippers, and they're awful, terrible. And it was like, we started at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was like being at a rock concert, the banging on the floor, and they were cheering, and I think they'd all been given a drink. I'm not sure. We were all absolutely drunk, pissed out of our heads, because it was a nightmare. Everybody was terrified. And the night before we did this, Tom Wilkinson couldn't pull his pants off. I'd got him, because they'd come undone when we'd done the scene about 2 weeks earlier when they were doing the rehearsal, and the police raid them and they all run off. Tom's pants, if you watch the movie, Tom's pants are actually coming off in that scene, and they shouldn't have done. So I had to replace all the Velcro. And the night before we did the strip, I said, come in and just try these pants to check you're happy with them. And he couldn't pull them off. And I was like, oh my God, they're all going to stand there, they're going to be in front of all these women, and they're not going to be able to pull their pants off, because the Velcro was so strong. So, so we had to make an announcement at the start, we're going to be shooting this over and over and over again. We have one tie for each actor, one hat for each actor, one shirt, one jacket, one pair of trousers. You've got to give them back when they end up in the audience. And everybody was very good, but I spent my whole time chasing accessories. Because we were so short-staffed, there was me, my assistant Tess, and Nikita, who was the standby, and we each had 2 guys to look after. I was looking after Bobby and Tom, and the others had the other 4 between them. And we just were running on the dressing gowns. As soon as they did it, we were just running on the dressing gowns. And then everybody else on the crew was helping gathering belts and hats and shirts and ties and pants. So, yeah. It's funnily enough, we were, Hugo, actually, I remember not long after the film came out, was interviewed on This Morning with Judy Finnegan and Richard Madeley. And he said, the costume girls plied us with champagne, which we did. And she said, oh, yeah, I know costume girls, and she's having a good ogle as well. And I was going to ring in, because I said I didn't see one cock all day. I was so concerned about getting clothes back and covering these boys up. We didn't, But yeah, they were pretty, all morning. They had their bits out, apart from, the red leather thongs came off once.